if we think about the duck curve in CAISO, everyone's always been worried about this net load ramp. The sun drops off, rooftop solar drops off, load picks up, and you have a massive ramp that you have to deal with. But if we look at ERCOT, ERCOT is a little bit less solar today, but in the very near future, we'll have significantly more solar than CAISO. It's got more wind by far. And we have the potential for net load ramps that are, about 5 times larger, as well as being harder to predict because you've got the wind forecast uncertainty that you don't really have in CAISO. Plus, there's an icing risk in cold weather, which creates an additional layer of uncertainty on wind generation. If we look at any acceleration of rooftop solar in ERCOT, then you have an even bigger net load ramp. And if we look at just what the price dynamics were yesterday, Houston is a very congested region, and so there could be a lot of value in having distributed resources inside the Houston zone, and that would further amplify it. And so, when we look at the duck curve in CAISO, and we think that that's a thing to worry about, when we look at ERCOT, everything is bigger. The CAISO duck curve is like this cute little baby duck, but the ERCOT duck curve has the potential to be a very, very, very massive duck. And so that's really one of the key market dynamics that we think is critically important to understand moving into the future is really the strain on the system during sunsets when you move to a really high solar penetration with a really high wind generation in the background. So let's dig a little deeper into this SuperDuck. So how super is it, right? So ERCOT, by the end of next year, depending on what happens with anti-dumping investigations and supply chains, ERCOT may be looking at 25 gigs of solar generation by the end of 2023. That's based on late development or late stage projects in the queue, posted financial security. There's a lot coming. And so, if you look at 25 gigawatts of solar, compare that to 15 for CAISO. ERCOT already has 35 gigs of wind online or synchronized, may have another 3 to 5 by the end of 2023. And so from a net load ramp standpoint, you're looking at a guaranteed solar ramp of 25 gigawatts because the sun's going to set. And so you're going to have roughly 25 gigawatts rolling off. You could have potentially another 15 to 20 gigawatts of wind, depending on what the wind is doing. Maybe it ramps up, maybe it ramps down, and who knows? And that uncertainty is a key part of the picture too. In the winter, you have load that increases after sunset. So you've got another few gigawatts of load increase at the same time. So think about, if you have 50 gigawatts of net load ramp, think about what the impact of forecast error might be. That's not a time that you want to be off in your forecast, because that's a massive ramp to have to work around, and the system is going to be very, very stretched. And we're talking very near future here, end of 23. We're already seeing, I took the last month of wind plus solar, and already regularly seeing 2-hour ramps of 15 gigawatts, and that's with solar only at 8.5. What happens if you get a big wind ramp at the same time as a solar, or at the same time as a sunset? It's going to be even bigger than that. ERCOT did a study where it was looking at average net load changes, looking at 2020, comparing to additions with more solar. So 10 gigawatts of solar, 20 gigs of solar, 30 gigs of solar. And what you see is that you start to get these 30 gigawatt net load ramps. And this is on average though. What happens when you don't look at the average and you look instead at what happens when wind does something it doesn't do on average and it drops at the same time as solar. So this is a very conservative case of the net load ramps we might see, because these averages are going to actually underpredict what the net load ramps are really going to be. And it's not just academic. We can already see it. This was a week in April 2021, where we had wind in green, solar in yellow. And on the 17th, solar was dropping, wind was dropping at the same time. And we saw a pretty severe price spike around sunset. The next day, we saw the same thing, wind dropping at the same time as solar was dropping, and we saw another severe spike around sunset. And then the next day, we saw wind do what it does on average, which is that it picks up as the sun drops. And so, they offset, and we see no price volatility. And instead, what we see is a huge dart spread. So day-ahead prices much higher than the real-time prices, because it's just difficult to account for that uncertainty. And we think this is going to be a critical dynamic where these sunset hours are going to continue to be very high volatility, but because of the uncertainty around what the wind is going to do, we also expect a lot of dart spreads and a lot of negative prices during that period as well.